This is from the Tao Te Ching, from Lao Tzu. The way of heaven is like the bending of a bow. The upper part is pressed down, the lower part is raised up. The part that has too much is reduced, the part that has too little is increased. Therefore, the way of heaven reduces surplus to make up for scarcity. The way of man reduces scarcity and pays tribute to surplus. Who is there that can have a surplus and take from it to pay tribute to heaven? Surely only one who has the way. For this reason, the sage acts but does not possess, completes his work but does not dwell on it. In this fashion, he has no desire to display his worth. And with that, welcome to House Einstein Podcast 112. I'm Osman, and with me is Hamish, and we're glad you're here too. Thanks for joining us today.
It's been a week that you haven't heard a new episode from us, so it's good to be back. And that poem is quite a bit to chew on. As I edit this podcast and stuff, I'm sure I'll start making more and more sense out of it. But that final takeaway, I think, is very true.
Well, that's what struck me, and I try to mix up my reading, and I've been working through the Tao Te Ching for actually quite a few years. It's sat on my bookshelf, and I haven't really spent a lot of time with it, but recently I've been spending more time with it, and that particular one struck me because it seems like there are people out there that don't really have much substance to offer in their services, but are really quite loud, and they're very I don't know what to call it. Like there's this puffery going on, and that puffery often is sitting on top of an inadequacy. And when you know you're adding value, you don't need to constantly trump how much value you add. Although I would say that in our business, it's a little challenging because a lot of agents don't do what we do. So we want to make sure
there's a line to toe.
We want to illustrate that, hey, we're doing a lot of things you normally wouldn't get in this profession when you just call your friend the realtor. But I also don't want to be constantly puffing on it because it would point to, you don't need to when you're adding value, and you feel confident in yourself that you've added that value. And that was the takeaway when I read that the other morning, and I felt like it would be a good opening for the House Einstein podcast today.
It's funny, you're thinking in terms of, brokerages and agents, and I'm like, there's a specific website developer that immediately comes to mind where the value add is low, but the cost is high.
Yeah. Sure. where their value proposition was largely based on how much more they charge than their competition.
Right.
And we're like, okay, got it. You're charging a lot more, but why? And their answer is, well, everyone uses us. Look at how many top agents use our websites. And I'm like, okay, but that's not value add, is that everyone else drives a Lexus, so you should too. Like, what about the Lexus makes it worth spending more money than a Honda Accord? And with Lexus, there's a lot. They could justify it. Yeah. And they don't just say because we're Lexus. Anyway, that's...
What's Honda's luxury brand? Because Lexus is Toyota's.
Acura.
That's it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Acura.
Sorry. Yeah.
But this podcast is not about cars. As much as Hamish and I think sometimes we'd like it to be about vehicles, it is not. We are here to talk about all things real estate related, particularly with a focus on Boulder, Colorado. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you that the podcast itself is entertainment, and it is sponsored by the House Einstein Brokerage, where our mission is to help you make a smarter real estate decision. You can learn a lot about the House Einstein Brokerage at houseeinstein.com. You can read our bios. We're going to skip all of that. But that disclaimer about the podcast is important. So please don't make any investment decisions or any other major decisions based on anything you hear in this podcast. And if you're a client of the brokerage, please pick up the phone and call your agent at House Einstein for advice about your specific real estate situation. That way we can give you our best advice that's actually grounded in your situation and not this entertainment podcast, which is intended to educate, but also is entertainment. So keep that in mind. Don't make any major decisions. And if you'd like to learn more, visit houseeinstein.com, where you can also sign up for our newsletter, which we're going to talk about quite a bit today because the core topic, or what we call the closing table topic of this podcast, is all about the things that your agent may not know and won't tell you, but that you should know if you're buying real estate here in the city of Boulder. And it's really come to the forefront because year after year, I have seen properties come back on market that sold a year or two or sometimes 3 years earlier, and the acquirer of that property is reselling it. They're selling it often because they can't do with it what they thought they could do with it. They run into restrictions around floodplains or our building code, or they find out that what they thought was open space behind them isn't open space at all. And even though it was marketed as beautiful open space, killer views, which it has killer views, it is open for now. It's actually developable land.
Yeah, to
right?
the letter
of
the word.
And boy, the number of agents that go out on a limb and market their properties as adjacent to open space when it really isn't actual open space, or it's open space that's actually earmarked for housing development, right? That is it infuriates me when I see these properties come back to market. And with the new Boulder Valley comp plan that we talked about last week, and that's in the newsletter from last week, we talked about it extensively. I realized that most agents don't do a great job of explaining the regulatory framework that limits development in the city of Boulder. So we're going to get into it. And before you tune off and say, hey, I'm not a developer, you are a developer if you own property and are thinking about an addition or a modification to your property, basically of any kind. And even if you want to pull a permit, you might find yourself handcuffed by the limitations that are imposed on the property by the city of Boulder and our building codes. So everyone, if you're a homeowner, should think of themselves in some way as a potential developer, if only you're trying to maximize the utility of the property, or in some cases just maintain it in the city of Boulder. So don't let the word developer mean big builder of massive housing projects. It does not mean that in the context of this podcast. So, but we're going to talk about all sorts of things that I think are really important for buyers and sellers to understand, and agents, frankly. I know a lot of agents listen to this podcast, and many of you, I'm sorry, are not doing a great job of advising your clients about what they're about to write a big check for. So we're going to talk about zoning. We're going to talk about the blue line. We're going to talk about height limits, solar access. We're going to talk about affordable housing and the compatible development ordinance. Boy, there's a lot in here. We're going to talk about the Boulder Energy Conservation Code, the recently passed family-friendly vibrant neighborhoods ordinance, as well as historic review and floodplain restrictions. Well, that's the core meat of the closing table topic. There is a lot in here, and we're not going to get to everything in as much depth as I would like. So this is my call out once again to sign up for our newsletter, House Einstein's Fresh Listings. You can find it at houseeinstein.com. The link is right there at the top to sign up, and you will then get the full write-up about this stuff, because it's difficult to go into the depth that we would like to in this podcast, but we cover it in pretty extensive detail in the latest newsletter, which will be out on Friday. So if you sign up today, don't expect to see it.
Not today.
You think, well, it'll definitely be out Friday.
Actually, we're saying out Friday. It's out today because we're going to publish the podcast.
Right.
It's all going to be on the same day. Yeah.
It'll be out when you listen. It will be out by the time you hear this podcast. Yes.
That's right.
Okay.
I'd say if you sign up after listening to this podcast and the newsletter is already released, would it be best to reach out to us and then we send you a link to the newsletter? Right, because it won't. Or when you sign up, do you get the latest issue as you sign up? Like if we released it.
I'm pretty sure you have access to the archive when you sign up to the podcast, but we should double check that and make sure that the landing page for when you subscribe includes a link to the full archive, because otherwise you won't see it if you're signing up to this podcast after, weeks after. If you're signing up for the newsletter weeks after you hear this podcast, or weeks after the podcast is published, you may not get this. And this is actually quite evergreen. This information, while it's under threat, quite frankly, by the new Boulder Valley comp plan, it will at least continue to exist for the next couple of years until the comp plan is enacted. The comp plan has to be voted in, and then it takes time for the new rules to take effect. So it's not going to be an instantaneous change for now. These rules are in play, and it's really important that buyers and sellers understand them, because it governs the real value of property in the city of Boulder.
Yeah. So I actually almost wanted to get into the closing table, and I'm going to bench that thought for when we do. But topics today,
yeah, let's keep going through topics. We've got our usual Tales from the Trenches segment where we share actual stories from what's happening in real estate deals here in Boulder. And this week we're going to talk about the double listing agent fallacy, which we're seeing increasingly hit our market as price points start to look more like luxury home markets, vacation home markets. It's a much more common thing to see a double listing agent cross brokerages. So we're starting to see that phenomenon. Yeah. We're going to talk about market conditions for most of the first quarter. It came up in our team meeting this week, and I did it live for the team, which is how's the market been this spring? We're not fully through the first quarter. So I started to do the data analysis for the full quarter, and then I realized, hold on a second, we still have at least, like today, as of this, this data was analyzed on Tuesday, so that was March 24th. And the quarter ends March 31st, but you need at least a week to get data to actually be closer to accurate, because agents typically don't enter in the data for a few days and their teams. So, Friday there's a lot of closings, and then a couple days later the database gets updated. So I wait at least a week before we talk about the previous month or the full quarter. But for purposes of this analysis, we cut it off at March 15th. We said, okay, let's look at January 1 through March 15th last year and look at January 1 through March 15th of this year. That should be reasonably accurate to get a good sense of what's happening in the market. And we looked at Boulder and Denver single-family houses. So I'll share that analysis with you when we get to that segment.
And then we did get a comment asking about different mountain neighborhoods. And I think that was going to be in here, but this kind of happened. So we will... I think we've made a note, and we'll revisit that as a market conditions topic too.
I definitely want to be
just remembered. Yeah.
So I think what we'll do is maybe do like a high level kind of overview of these what we call foothills or near mountain property. These are within 15 to 20 minutes of the city of Boulder, and how they trade differently. Sometimes a little further, like Gold Hill and Ward and Jamestown are a little further than 15 to 20 minutes, but they also have their own little unique ecosystem. So we're going to touch base on a number of those, but doing an actual deep depth analysis of those is actually the time return equation doesn't add up. Like, that's a major research project. And if we have a client that's looking in those markets, let's sit down and go through it. And we will in a very granular way, advise you on how these locations trade differently.
Yeah, how they interact.
And at the end of the day, your preferences guide that analysis, not like, let's just do an academic analysis of Gold Hill versus Jamestown, or let's look at Sugarloaf versus Sunshine versus 4 Mile versus, the Lazy Acres, like Pine Brook. Like, there's so much in there to unpack, and it only makes sense for a very, very unique client to go down that rabbit hole. So my promise to you is we would, if you're that client, call me and let's establish a working relationship, and we'll go deep dive. But for purposes of the pod, we're going to keep it pretty top level. And then we're going to talk about sales of the week. There are 6 this week. I hope we get through all of them. 2 of them are so close to each other that they kind of fall under the same category. So we're going to talk about 1000 Spring Drive, 635 Paragon Drive, 3875 Cloverleaf, 2587 Ginny Way in Blue Heron Estates, 527 West Ash Court, and 7933 Countryside Drive in Niwot. And then we will touch on our next segment. That's shameless self-promotion. In this case, we're talking about a listing we're working on, and we're probably less than 2 weeks away from activating. So we're about a week, really, because staging should be done. No, we're about 2 weeks. We're going the week after Easter. Yeah.
That's right.
Yep. Okay. We've got a couple of items in the news that I know you're going to want to hear about. One is the recent $18 million sale in Mapleton Hill, and it is at 700 Highland Ave. It just hit the news. It was not on the MLS. It was not on the private network websites either. This is a true whisper listing. Ooh. And whisper listings are for people that have incredible privacy concerns, and they would like the luxury brokerage community to know about it, but the luxury brokerage community also can't market this publicly. So it's shared in private broker meetings, and there are very unique circumstances for why you might want to do that, and this is one of those particular deals. We're going to talk about the King Soopers shooting because it's the 5th anniversary of that this week. And then we're going to talk about fire conditions and water conditions because it has been so dry and so hot.
90 yesterday.
And people are already feeling anxiety about this year's fire season. I have a friend who's moving here from North Carolina, and we are helping her to probably rent is what they're going to do initially. And she pulled up a property that's in off of Lee Hill and sent it to me. And boy, I would not advise her to buy something that's at that high fire risk, built in the late 60s, and probably not well mitigated for wildfire. Plus, dogs are there, and you're not there, and a fire breaks out. Like the level of anxiety with that this year in particular, like I'm moving here from a place that actually gets a lot of rain. I don't know if that's a great idea. You may want to be back in town. So we've got a really bad fire season likely ahead, and we're going to talk about that in more detail. And then finally, our carve-outs. I'm going to talk about a bit of a darker subject, which we'll get to. And Hamish, you're talking about air pressure in your house.
Really riveting stuff.
Maybe you should go first. So Carveouts is our segment where we talk about anything other than real estate that sometimes it relates to real estate, but it just happens to be what's top of mind for us and things that are fun and interesting or meaningful to talk about. And that's our table of contents for this coming podcast that we're about to share with you. Again, thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining with us. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your comments. What do you think? Should we get started?
Without further ado.
This podcast is sponsored by House Einstein. We serve buyers and sellers in Colorado, focusing on Boulder, Denver, and several mountain resort towns, including Breckenridge and Winter Park. Our mission is simple: help you make a smarter real estate decision. You can learn more at houseeinstein.com or our YouTube channel, where you'll find videos on neighborhoods, specific listings, and much, much more.
Oh, you were saying with the draft Boulder Valley comp plan coming up, aren't some of these things that we're going to discuss like hard coded in? There was like the blue line, right? Like I remember reading something where it's like a charter rule or something where the city council can't overturn it even if they wanted to.
And that's an important thing to understand, is that some of the people, the activists who got legislation passed that protected our mountain backdrop and our open space intentionally did it as an amendment to the city's charter. And the reason they did it is so to protect it from a city council that flippantly wants to change it, right?
They saw the writing on the wall.
They saw how city councils change over time, and they sometimes do things that are against popular interest in order to serve other ideals, like the progressive desire for more housing is situated directly up against the low-density nature of some of our historic neighborhoods. And if you put it to a vote of the citizens, I don't think our citizens would likely say, absolutely, let's increase city capacity by 30% or even more. Pomerantz thinks it's like 60%.
Yeah.
I think pretty much everyone would say Boulder can figure it out with infill, but we don't necessarily need to acquire the planning reserve and build it into it. Like, there are many things that we don't necessarily need to do, but council would like to do them. And the reason these charter amendments are way more protective is that it would have to go back to a vote of the citizens in order to overturn a charter amendment. That's the protective mechanism against a runaway council.
So it defaults to real democracy versus like representative democracy.
Hamish, representative democracy is a form of democracy. We have that in our country. It does interestingly, there's a good argument, and this is not a political science podcast, and they're not political science experts, but for sure, these are interesting moments when you realize that there are things that our elected representatives are doing that the citizens would not vote to do, like invasion of Iran, for example. It's largely unpopular on both sides of the aisle. in the citizenship, right? Within the
Good point,
popular
yeah.
polling says it's really unpopular. Yet our president went ahead and did it anyway, and there's no change. Anyway, that's not what podcast is about, but for sure, that's just an extreme example.
So,
Okay, so
Yeah.
imagine you're shopping for a home in Boulder. You've been checking out the neighborhoods. You're scheduling showings with your agent, and you're getting educated, right? You are learning about what works for you and what doesn't work for you in terms of price range and the quality of the home and the features of the home. But in addition, your agent should be advising you about rules and regulations that may limit a particular property when they understand what your needs are. And a few years ago, we turned down a listing on Upland because of the limitations of that property. It was in the 100-year flood. And the seller did not want to acknowledge that and did not want to talk about the market impact of that. And we eventually decided we don't want to work with this particular client because odds of success are low. And if they are successful, they might be predicated on pretending that this lot has value that it really doesn't. And that felt very uncomfortable, and we decided
very
not to
close
keep the
to
listing.
misrepresentation. Yep.
And that particular home, let me double check to make sure I have this right because people could look it up, and I don't want to mention the address.
I know
It
that
did,
much.
and then it came back on market. That's my
Yeah.
recollection. Let me make sure that's true because memories are fallible. So let's look for the last 2 years back. I think this is within the time period. So it sold, for 2.5 in 2023. And when you look at that history, it was then relisted at a higher price. So this is almost always the case, right? They bought into the dream. The listing says, imagine your dream home. They bought into this large lot with stellar views of the Flatirons. And then they discover that the 100-year flood limitation is really restrictive, and they're not going to be able to build what they want, at least not within any reasonable price point, because now they have to do what? They have to lift the structure out of the 100-year flood. So these people, they bought it in October of 2023. A year later, it's on the market at $350,000 more than they paid for it. So this is the first wishful thinking, that they think they got a screaming deal, even though they paid full list for it.
That's like a recoup commissions mindset too, right? That
Right.
amount of bump. Yeah.
I mean, in this case, even more than that. Like we're gonna get out of this house and we're gonna recoup the commissions. It's gonna be amazing. It'll sell really fast. Guess what? It didn't. It was on the market from October through January. No price reductions. Didn't sell. And then they relisted or refreshed it in January of last year, and it was on the market from January to June at 2.65. Also didn't sell. And I don't know if they're contacting their attorneys to see if there was malpractice on the part of their agents. I would argue agents have a duty to advise, right? And some agents run away from due diligence, right? They say due diligence is 100% the responsibility of the buyer, and we're not going to help at all. In fact, we're not going to even talk about it. And yeah, in this case, I don't know what the buyer's agent, when she helped them acquire this lot, this buildable, it is a buildable lot. I mean, it's got a historic house on it, a house from the 50s. It's a 2,400 square foot house. It's got 33,000 square feet in the lot. It's a big lot. But that 100-year flood running right through the middle of it, I'm sure is going to cause a lot of problems. So let's start there, okay, in this list of things that buyers should know. And when it comes to floodplain restrictions, 100-year flood or worse restrict your ability for new permits to a percentage of the assessed value of the structure. I'm going to say that again. A percentage of the assessed value of the structure, not the whole property, only the improvements,
structure,
which are the structures sitting on top of the dirt, are the improvements. And that percentage is usually 50%. So you're allowed to permit up to 50% of the assessed value of the structure, and as the assessed value moves up, your cushion for more permits increases. And let me add one more piece. I'm not an expert in permitting, but this is basic and general advice on one of the key limitations of this property. The other one is, I believe it probably still is, 50% of the square footage could be added, right? So if it's a 2,000 square foot house, you can add 50%. So you can add another 1,000 square feet, right? So that's the other restriction. And what they're trying to do is get owners to lift their property out of the floodplain, right? They don't want people to continue to develop in the floodplain because these properties are at risk.
That was going to be the next thing that I bring up is if you're listening to this and you're like, well, let's just, build a huge berm around the property. I don't necessarily know. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't direct water onto your neighbor's lot. There may be other ways to get the property out of the floodplain. And you could do a letter of amendment with Army Corps. You can do the engineering and lift the property or somehow re-engineer the floodplain. Okay, it's not going to be cheap, but maybe you can do that. And if you can do that and prove it, you can have a property removed from the 100-year floodplain. And the 100-year floodplain... You're going to want
the stomach for that, too,
Yeah. I mean, we tried. I had a listing a few years ago, and it was on Spring Valley Drive, and the lower level of this tri-level house was in the floodplain. The upper levels were not. And the owner was convinced this is wrong, so we hired a surveyor who came and verified, charged us whatever, $700, and verified that no, it's in the floodplain. And so we had to list it as in the 100-year floodplain. And he was not very happy about that, but that didn't change reality. It's in the 100-year floodplain, period. Yeah. And during the flood of 2013, water had backed up into the lower level through the sewage pipes. And so he had installed plugs that can be removed in the driveway in the event of something like that ever happening again.
So it backs out in the driveway.
It backs up in the driveway instead of inside the house, which, okay, fine. Maybe that's the right engineering solution, or maybe it's a stopgap solution. I'm not entirely sure, but it affected the value of this house that I listed, and for sure affects the value of this particular property that's currently not on the market. So we could talk about it, but I don't really want to create waves with the listing agent or the seller. I wish them well, but they need to disclose, and I think they are. Let's see, are they disclosing it's in the 100-year flood? They are disclosing it's in the 100-year flood, so that's fine.
Okay. Props.
And so here's the thing: some agents will put that onus on a buyer, and we talk about that actually in one of this week's fresh listings in the newsletter. So in the newsletter we can talk about active listings. Because you are a prospective client, that's why you're signing up, or you're trying to consider developing a relationship with House Einstein and the brokerage, so we can put our criticism or our evaluations of active listings under private cover in a newsletter that is delivered directly to your inbox. The podcast and any public-facing content cannot be talking about active listings. So in this podcast, we talk about what? We talk about sold listings, but not active listings. And that's something a rule we have to follow. So just want to clarify that before we go any further. So that's the thing with the 100-year flood. You also are subject to having flood insurance if you have a mortgage. But the thing that many people don't understand is that the 500-year flood is also at risk. And it was one of our clients who are climate change modelers and experts in floodplains that also refused to look at 500-year flood properties. And the reason was that they say that all of floodplain mapping has political influence in it. And if it's the 500-year flood, it still is at risk, particularly given climate change, increasing severity of storms. They wouldn't even touch a 500-year flood property, which is not subject to the development restrictions that the 100-year and worse are subject to. So, long story short, understand floodplain restrictions. And if you were thinking about buying something that's in the floodplain, what I tell my clients is that you should really get some sort of commensurate trade-off. There's something that, frankly, it's not commensurate. It should be well above the cost to the floodplain to you. So if you were right downtown, for example, and you want to build a building like the St. Julian that's in the floodplain, and they have engineered solutions to get the permits, boy, it's right downtown. It totally makes sense to take that risk. If you have amazing Flatiron views, which our listing on Spring Valley had, if it had those amazing views of the Flatirons, then yes, you have a trade-off that is well worth the cost of flood insurance and the permitting restrictions. But without that, you should really strongly consider running away from property that is in the 100-year flood or worse, because you're taking on a lot of risk. At least you should fully understand it before you jump in. And that's honestly, I think that's one of the jobs of your agent, and a lot of agents aren't doing it. But let's jump into do you have anything else to add, Hamish?
No, I think that handles it right. It's a game of trade-offs, but as a general rule, rather not. And I think after the 2013 floods, it's far more front of mind for people. It's been 13 years now, but I think it's still pretty felt. So,
It's deep in the memories of anybody who was here, and the newcomers to our community and would-be sellers would hope you don't know about it. Newcomers to the communities often don't know, and potential sellers would prefer you not to know. But it's important that you understand that Boulder is one of the most flood risk cities, if not the most at risk to flood cities in Colorado. Yeah,
and I think I'll be citing those clients that wouldn't live in a flood zone during the news segment. So, but man, there's tons here. You've got like height limits, blue line, zoning. Which one do you want to hit?
Okay, let me just add one last thing about flood, and then we're going to go through these other ones quickly because I get what you're throwing down, Hamish. There's a lot in here. We're not going to be able to cover it all, so go to the newsletter if you want the full details. Yeah. But let me just add the last piece. I think part of this is like the Dunning-Kruger effect. Like you don't know what you don't know, and you're incompetent because you don't know what you don't know, but you think you're competent because it's something you have some familiarity with. And that isn't exactly the definition of Dunning-Kruger, but it rhymes with it. Yeah. Basically, I grew up in upstate New York, right? And there are low-lying areas that are much more prone to flooding due to the river that runs through the community. And there was a historic flood that everyone knows about that happened in the 70s, where literally water was at like chest high in a lot of buildings that were anywhere near the river. And so in my mind, property that is at risk of flood exists in places where there's lots of water and there are low-lying areas. And it turns out that that's not really a good mental construct. Yeah. It's not a good basis for reality. And so people think we're in Colorado. How could some place that's so high in elevation, mile high, have high risk of flooding? And they just don't understand hydrology and how water channels into watersheds. And I mean, just look up
South Boulder Creek, right? Yeah.
The Big Thompson flood. Like there have been many floods in Boulder that have caused a lot of property damage over many years. And even though we've made a lot of improvements on how we manage that, it's still something that buyers need to understand or should understand. And frankly, sellers should be honest about if they're marketing a property and they're not disclosing the floodplain. If they're willfully or accidentally ignorant of the floodplain. So, Caveat emptor is the headline of the newsletter, and it's all on these topics. Let's jump to zoning. I got what you're throwing down, so let's jump to zoning.
I just want to make sure we don't hyper focus on floodplain because there's so much here that's like worth covering. Yeah.
You're absolutely right, and this is more high level, so we'll move on to that. Boulder adopted its first zoning ordinance in the 1920s, and the idea was to push noxious industries to the outskirts of town, and it chopped up the city by use and strictly separated residential, commercial, and industrial areas. And today, zoning still exists, although they are looking at throwing out the baby with the bathwater in the comp plan. But right now, there is zoning, and there's many, many zoning areas, well over 20. And those zoning areas define things like use, but also setbacks. And minimum lot sizes can also be part of zoning. So that still exists today. And in the 1950s, we went further. We passed the blue line, which was an ordinance, strike that, a charter amendment. Again, remember, charter amendments are a vote by the citizens and much harder to overturn, that limit water from the city to be pumped above 5,750 feet, and then later included sewer services for the same exact purpose. And what the effect of that is that you now need a well and an on-site waste disposal system, also septic. That's what on-site waste disposal usually means, septic and a leach field, in order to handle human waste in lots that are above 5,750 feet. You need a deep well, and you need an on-site waste disposal system.
Yeah.
And the goal was to discourage development in the mountain backdrop, and I think it was very successful. In the 1970s, another charter amendment was passed for height limits. And this happened after a number of large buildings were constructed, which still exist. There's one downtown that was affectionately called the Monster. It's the tallest building downtown. You can't miss it. It's got these colorful blocks on the wall that are very 1960s, because that's when the building was constructed. Yeah. And in 1971, they passed this absolute limit on height limits at 55 feet. But for residential property, most of those are capped at 30 to 35 feet. Some of the commercial downtown and industrial areas have a higher base, but there are additional limitations on that height limit that can impact an ignorant buyer, and that is the lowest point on the lot is where that height limit begins. So if you're buying something on a steeply sloped lot and there's an existing house, it's a fairly good bet you can build the same height to the existing house. You may have to do a song and a dance to get it, which you frequently see, which is people have basically deconstructed everything but the roof line of the home and build a brand new house all around it, and then they replace the roof line without removing it entirely. And the reason they're doing it that way is to avoid triggering a review that would reduce the height limit of the house. So so those height limits are really important. We don't want tall buildings in the city of Boulder. And again, a charter amendment. In the 1980s, we passed the solar access ordinance. So this is not a charter amendment, but it is the idea of the solar access ordinance is to preserve access to the sun for people that live here in the city of Boulder. And the way we did that is with an imaginary solar fence erected at the property line. So there's an imaginary fence of 12 or 25 feet high, and then on December 21st, the winter solstice, at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., measurements are taken on the shadows from that imaginary fence. And if what you are building exceeds the length of that shadow, you need to revise your permit, your structure and design so it does not. That's the hard limit. You cannot do more than a 12-foot fence at the shadow line, or in some cases a 25-foot high fence.
This one, I saw a post on Facebook. I think it was maybe a home in Denver, but that was specifically the complaint. Their neighbor had built, and objectively, it was a terrible addition. They popped the top of their garage to 3 stories on a ranch. So it was a ranch home with just this growth on it. And then, the neighbor had no sunlight in their yard. Their house was dark, everything, because it just blocked out all the sun.
Right.
And I was tempted to go and comment a big, long story about Boulder's solar rights. But, I really like the solar access one.
I mean, I love it too, although sometimes I don't. I have a property in town where there's a garage, and I'd love to build a ADU on top of the garage, create more housing, improve the quality of the investment, maybe live in this property again someday. And the neighbor would have to advocate for it because they would be impacted on the north side of the property. Yeah. They're going to get a big shadow, and she's like, absolutely not. Build it elsewhere.
Yeah, she wouldn't.
I garden back there, and I do not want a big looming two-story ADU with windows. I'm like, I could put the windows facing the other way. She's like, I don't care about where the windows are. I don't want it. I'm not going to do it. Not going to happen. See you later. I'm like, okay, great. Thanks for your feedback, neighbor. Appreciate your willingness to consider. But also, I respect her decision, right? I'm trying to get a variance to the ordinance, and it may not even have been granted anyway, but she made it really clear that she would fight me. And I was like, okay, well, then that's the end of that, and I'm not shoveling your walk anymore.
Quid pro quo,
I think I still shoveled her walk, but I was tempted to not shovel her walk in a petty response to her shutdown. There's nothing even gardening back there, but whatever. We're just going to let it go and move on. In 2000, the city passed an affordable housing ordinance mandating 20% of total units in new developments are affordable. And that applies to you too, as somebody who's building a house. That means that you need to pay a fee in lieu of building and a 20%, because you can't build a 20% of a house, right? So you pay a fee to the city that then is happy to take your money. Larger developments, that threshold is 25%. So if you're creating 5 or more units, 25% of those need to be affordable. Or you can pay the cash in lieu. And again, the city is really happy to take the cash and not force you to build, which is something that really drives me crazy because I think it impacts the diversity and locations of these affordable housing units. But
I think that's a bit cheap of a cop-out.
It's way more profitable, right? So if you're going to build a 3-plex downtown, right, there's a triplex townhome that I've been focused on for the last more than a decade, and they're all really high-end luxury units, townhomes. And what was a really dilapidated old 50s house or something like that. They scraped it, deconstructed it. It's Boulder. We deconstruct. We don't
Boulder
scrape.
Scraped. Yep.
Yeah. Boulder deconstruct and reutilize anything of value. But then they built 3 really nice luxury townhomes that are worth a lot of money and have never had a problem seemingly selling. The market for that is really high because you're right downtown, and they got their 3 luxury properties. They made a lot more money to just pay the developer pay the city 20% of what an affordable house would cost as a fee.
Yeah, I have some comments about the implementation of that affordable housing dealio, but yeah, good to know.
Okay. And I may not have quoted the math exactly right there. I just want to mention that I may have not had the math right. But the thresholds are 20% of the total units need to be affordable to low and moderate income households. But if you're creating 5 or more units, that threshold is 25%. Okay, let's move on to compatible development. And this is, now I've moved to Boulder, right? I first lived in Boulder in 2000. I moved away after a year, and I moved back in 2005. And I remember when this ordinance was being debated in front of council, and it passed, and I was shocked. You'll find me somewhere on video, young Osman, in front of council, dropping a bucket of change for visual effect.
Really?
To talk about the money that was being taken from homeowners without them realizing it. Because by restricting the ability for homeowners to add to the property or modify it or deconstruct it and replace it, by limiting it further, they were also removing value from those owners, and those owners didn't get a vote, right? Or city council got a vote, but they didn't. The owners never got a say in this. And what I was feeling for was elderly people, right? Like they've owned this little bungalow in Newlands, and because at the time you could build a 5,000 square foot house in this little bungalow from the 50s, that the dirt value was really high. And so this radically reduced the dirt value because you no longer could build those 5,000 square foot houses. And the ones that had been built prior to 2009 are now worth a lot more money because you can't build something that big. And for a lot of people, 5,000 square feet, for me, it's huge. But for a lot of people, that's not that big when they're moving from other parts of the country. So the idea of the compatible development ordinance was to limit, quote, out-of-scale homes that change the eclectic, modest character of older neighborhoods. Some call it the Pops and Scrapes ordinance. In hindsight, I'm okay with this ordinance, right? In 2009, I was against it. It seems to have worked okay, but there are a couple of pieces to it. Bulk plane standards, sidewall articulations, and floor area ratios. I'm not going to go into details here because we're going to run out the clock on time. But again, go to the newsletter if you want more details on that.
I will say, if you're going in front of city council again, it's the bucket of change, but instead you're like, these are property taxes you'll be missing out on, and it might hit them a little harder,
Maybe. I don't think they care. The property values just keep going up in Boulder.
Yeah.
But those owners that wanted to add a simple cheap addition have found the rules pretty restrictive, and architects have to work around roof lines and massing to fit inside these bulk planes. And the bulk plane is basically what we don't want to see as a big looming wall, right? So you have to fit inside. Imagine a tent, with the center of the lot. There's the peak of the tent. You have to fit within this shape, and that really changes design. At the time, I felt like, look, if you really want to legislate design, just go the Nantucket way and have a committee of people that have to approve every design. And they can be completely arbitrary. They can just say, we don't like the number of dormers, and we'd like this to look a little different. And so the end result is architects will overstate the house design because they know they have to give up things to get things done. But it allows the city to have what it really wants, which is plan by plan ability to reject a design arbitrarily. And that's what I think the city would prefer to have. But instead, they created this giant code book, which we're going to keep going through. In 2017, we threw away the Green Points program, which was an energy efficiency standards for permitting, and we put in place a much more restrictive Boulder Energy Conservation Code, or BEC. And today, the code has since been improved. There was a 2020 revision, and the current test is looking at anything that's over 3,000 square feet or larger, has to be net zero, and homes must pass a home energy rating system test, a HERS test, to prove they're highly energy efficient in order to get their permits. And of course, we're still doing things like recycling construction waste, which is really important. But people can also comply with these rules by, installing EV charging points, making the house solar ready, etc. That's the Boulder Energy Conservation Code, but it is now it's now also requiring electrification, so you can't put in gas furnaces, which changes the nature of heating and cooling systems. If you look at high-end homes that were recently constructed, none of them have a gas furnace because they can't.
That's outstanding.
I mean, you love solar, Hamish. Why are you not on board? Why are you upset with this?
I like redundancy, and also like I'm thinking, heat pumps are getting more and more efficient and everything, which is awesome. But like the drop-in replacement that I see for furnaces from an electrification standpoint is just like resistive heating strips, and like the demand and the amount of electricity that consumes is so insane. And then you've got kind of like an infrastructure consideration when it comes to like that much amperage flowing into your home. So
well, somebody that needs to replace a gas furnace can still replace a gas furnace,
right?
So I don't know what these energy strips are, but at the same time,
yeah.
What I envision is Oprah Winfrey, and that meme, like you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car, and now what I see is, and you get a mini split, and you get a mini split, and you get a mini split, because you have no choice. And I've got one right here above me. Mini splits work incredibly well, and they're getting better all the time, and now they are in every new luxury home, not because everyone wants it. The market is not demanding that. It's the regulatory environment that's mandating that. I'm okay with it, for the record. Although I feel like the libertarian in me is like annoyed by this, but
I will say they're requiring very efficient new builds as well. So I'm over here worrying about like the consumption of resistive electric, but if it's a very well insulated home and everything, I bet you it doesn't need a whole lot, and then a heat pump might actually be able to handle it all together. But yeah, if I were to try and replace my furnace with a resistive electric, which I'm kind of doing, it's a lot, at least in the ducting standpoint.
All right, let's talk about last year's legislation and what has to be the most Orwellian named piece of ordinance that was passed by the city, in my experience. And they called it the Family Friendly Vibrant Neighborhoods Ordinance. And they could have called it the High Density Can't Find Parking ADU Ordinance, but they chose the Family Friendly Vibrant Neighborhoods Ordinance instead. And this basically has removed all restrictions on ADUs to allow duplexes and triplexes in traditional single family neighborhoods. So ADUs used to have a saturation limit, no longer. And a lot of the other barriers are gone for duplexes and triplexes, and they're going to continue to go. Part of that, I think, is because we have no choice. We have to comply with the state mandate. The state laws override city laws, and so part of that is, I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek. Part of that was to be in compliance, but at the same time, I don't think most people realize what just happened, because you no longer have to live in the property. It can be an investment property, and you could build ADUs. And before, it had to be residential only, like it was your primary residence only. And now it's basically a free for all. And if the math works, I would be building them all over town. I can't figure out how to get the right combination of building. First of all, I'm against it. Hold on, let me back up. I was against it in many ways, but because I feel like, all right, this is our new framework, like, it doesn't mean you shouldn't seek to optimize your own personal investment portfolio. But the net effect of this particular ordinance is going to be a lot more density. And we're not done yet, because with the Boulder Valley Comp Plan, there's a lot more coming.
I bet this one has interesting interactions, or maybe it doesn't, but with compatible development and that bulk plane. I don't know, but...
Right, and so that's part of the reason for the Boulder Valley Comp Plan. The new plan is to set guidance to remove some of these barriers. And what barriers can be easily removed, ordinances can be overturned by council. What ones cannot be easily removed, those are the charter amendments. And at the same time, I think that they will try. So expect that the battle to continue over density in the city of Boulder. And I suspect some people may not like the philosophy I have, which is fight for the regulations you want to preserve, but at the end of the day, as an individual, if the regulations change, you still should be looking to optimize your own personal investment portfolio in ways that make sense and are ethical. And, you may want to think about whether you want to do that or not. But I personally don't have, I'm not judging people that are building ADUs. I just wish the regulations didn't allow people to build as much density. But and part of that is just this recognition of how congested Boulder has become. I used to be easily able to drive around town, and then I noticed that there was a change when the students are here and not. It's so much easier to get around town when the students aren't here. But I love the students, right? Their energy and their enthusiasm and their zaniness. Yesterday, they were all out at the creek and having a giant party at Boulder Creek, which, I'm happy for them. They're young people enjoying the sunshine and being young people. But 30,000 more people in the city of Boulder is going to gridlock the city unless we actually figure out realistic ways to get people out of their cars. And that's been a battle that has been a losing one for city planners all across the country for 50 years. So I don't think the city of Boulder is going to solve that, and the net effect is going to be more gridlock. And I love bicycling, but not everyone can balance a bike. And
if we still get snow too, that's going to be a factor. Biking in the snow is the whole thing.
We plow our walks.
You got a point. Anyhow, driving into town yesterday, I was going the opposite direction of traffic, and the amount of cars, it just really puts into scale the amount of people that are transiting into Boulder each day and leaving. Because I was heading there right around rush hour, and it was smooth sailing drive into Boulder, but it was gridlock all the way out. Yeah. It's just dang.
Right, and I think that's also one of the duties agents have when they're talking to their clients about homes to consider purchasing, particularly if they're from out of town, is to talk not just about commute distance, but the quality of the commute and the duration of the commute. Living in the lower foothills, you have a very pleasant drive in most of the time. But if Boulder Canyon had an accident, it could shut down the whole canyon. So the dream of living in Ned can really quickly turn into a nightmare when you realize winter lasts 2 months longer, and Boulder Canyon can be a choke point if there's an accident. So, and if it's snowy, you could be crawling home. What took you 25 minutes now takes you an hour and a half, and that could be really miserable in a snowstorm. That sort of stuff is important for agents to help their clients understand. And then if they're cool with it, great. As long as I feel like you've talked about it, you mentioned it. All right, so let's talk about the last item in this list and wrap up our closing table, and that's historic review. And historic review, people, and I think what they envision is that it must be pre-war in order for it to require historic review, and that is absolutely false. It needs to be 50 years or older, and in which case there is at least some level of historic review. Some of that is desktop review. If it's post-war, they're not going to pay as much attention to it. If it's pre-war, and I'm talking about World War II, if it's pre-World War II, they're going to pay a ton of attention to it. And some of the reasons that permits have been delayed or denied have been because a person of significance to the city lived in that house or originally owned that house. And this is something that really catches buyers by surprise. They think that historic review only applies to really old houses pre-war or only really applies to homes that are in the historic district. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The cutoff year right now, as of this podcast, is 1976. And if the property is older than 1976, it's going to get some kind of historic review when you go to get that permit. And if you're trying to modify the exterior or add square footage or even just enlarge the windows or doors, this could mean the Landmarks Board is looking at this if they think this has some significance. And the Landmarks Board can decide to just delay the project by 180 days arbitrarily if you're trying to get a demo permit just so they have time to explore alternatives. So take that very seriously if you're buying in the city of Boulder, particularly if you're looking at pre-war, but also that time period up until 1976. You are subject to historic review, period.
When I saw that 50 years or older, I was like, there's no way. I went and verified. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. That's crazy. I mean,
they streamlined it for newer homes, but it still exists. And by newer, I mean 1972, right? It still exists. It's still in the code. Your life could be surprisingly made miserable by city staff if they decide to do so, or the Landmarks Board if they decide to do so. And believe me, they will if they feel like this is actually a property that the community cares about. And you may be caught by surprise particularly because sometimes the listing information is wrong. And we're going to talk about that in this week's Fresh Listings. There's a house that is currently on the market. It's under contract in Mapleton Hill, and it's mislisted. The listing says it's built in 1920 because the listing agent pulled it up from the tax record. The tax record, when they don't actually do the research, they just say 1920 because that was the year of a fire, and that's when all the county records burned. But this house was actually built in 1909 and may have some significant people, right, that lived in this house. So it's also in the district, so it would be shocking if the person was not aware of historic restrictions that currently has it under contract. But I can't talk about it anymore because it's an active listing.
Yes. But yeah, the historical side of things is real interesting. I'm a year off from that, so just made it. But it reminds me of Colorado emissions. I think it was like 15 years or something where you didn't have to get emissions on your car. But now they've hard capped it. So it's a specific year, and none of mine made that. So, but anyhow, there's a lot in Boulder, and it pays to know what you can and can't do, and how Boulder approaches its zoning and development, and I mean all the ins and outs of it.
I just feel like people need to have their eyes wide open, and when I see like this Upland listing, they bought it for $2.5. They've been unable to sell it for the last 2 years. They probably weren't aware of all the restrictions. They probably are from out of state. That's usually is how this story works, right? I don't know. I mean, they put millions. I don't know for a fact any of these things. Okay, I'm just making some assumptions. But even if they lived locally, they may not have realized all of these things that we just talked about that restrict the potential of the property. And my framework in my head has always been: you're not just buying the dirt. You're not just buying the house on the dirt. A big piece of a big component of the value of the property is its potential. And not paying adequate due diligence to the potential of the property, or lack thereof, can cost you a lot of money and heartache and time. And this is where I strongly believe agents have a fiduciary responsibility to advise their clients about all these things. And this is the first time I've ever written it up in this format, really describing it in plain English, all the ways that homes are restricted in Boulder. And there's a lot more. This is not all-inclusive. There is more than this out there. And that's why when we represent buyers, we will strongly advise if they are thinking about a future project with this property, that's one of the reasons they're buying it, that we need to get an architect involved, one that's actually taken it from vision to permit and can help guide you, that has a lot of experience navigating the city, because it's not just the code, it's how you navigate the code, right? Like, is this a bedroom or is this an office? That could have a big impact, at least it used to, on particular properties because of all sorts of things. We'll leave it at that point and encourage you to be careful with who you choose to advise you. Because if they're not thinking about the regulatory environment when they're advising you blindly, either willfully or out of ignorance, one of the two. And I would prefer to think it's out of ignorance, but I kind of wonder sometimes if it's willful ignorance.
There's that gray area where you can do the shrug, oh, I didn't know, but also it's difficult to prove that you did. Yeah.
Okay, that's our closing table topic. Let's move on to Tales from the Trenches.
That table is closed.
The closing table topic is officially off the table.
So it's not uncommon for agents to team up. I guess, Oz, did you see, without naming any names, some agents that seem to not necessarily have the same interests at hand team up? Or, the same common interest?
I first saw this problem on Nantucket, where I got started in real estate, where a seller would basically force two agents that know each other but don't work together, may not even be at the same brokerage, to team up on the listing. And my sense of that, having talked to the agents involved, is that there were loyalties to these people that are based on friendships. And so rather than disrespect a friendship, they co-list it with 2 or 3 different agents. There was one in town that I felt like had been listed with a huge team of agents that it was a big
brokerage.
It was a very high-end but they were cross brokerage, Hamish. It wasn't in the same brokerage. Gosh. It was a very high-end piece of property. I don't want to go into the details of that property, but it still would be today at that price 20-something years ago would blow out almost everything in Boulder in value. Like really high-end double-digit property and double-digit millions, double digits.
Yeah.
And so what shocked me, though, was the effect of forcing agents that are at different brokerages to work together was actually counter to the seller's interest, because these people, one, you're demotivating them from a commission perspective, because no matter what happens, they're now splitting it in 2 different brokerages with 2 different agents, so they're getting a lot less money, and they may not even like each other or work well together, and it's probably better to assume they don't work well together, because it takes time and shared values and sometimes hardship for teams to really establish themselves, right? Like, we've worked together with our core team now you've been with the brokerage for 3 years, so at least 3 years. We've had this core 4 years, 3 years. This is your 4.
4 years.
This is your 4.
This is my 4th. Yeah.
So in the beginning, you barely knew personalities. You weren't entirely sure of your role. My management style probably annoyed you. Like, we've worked together over years.
My employee style probably annoyed you. You know?
Yeah, but as the boss or the manager, your job is to be more dynamic and more flexible. In my mind, and figure out how to I hired you, right? So figure out how to work with your personality, and that's much more of an onus, I think, on the boss, because they're the ones that extended the offer, right?
Yeah, good point.
But it takes years to get a team to work really well together. And I feel like our team works incredibly smoothly. But lately I've been seeing some high-end listings suddenly be co-listed with 2 agents that both are very strong personalities, both have very different ways of doing business, both have different levels of competency and expertise. And suddenly they're co-listed on a new listing, and I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh, that's going to be interesting behind the scenes. And it's not just the marketing side.
I believe
because
that, yeah.
I would argue you might get better distribution of your content marketing, but I would also argue that you're going to get dysfunction when you get an offer. Because these agents, like, now they need to consult with each other, and then they need to advise you, and their egos are going to be in the way with who gets to talk to you, whose friend are you, like, who's taking the lead here, and do they even agree on the perspective on the list, on the price that you've been offered, the terms of the deal? Like, are they going to give you good, solid advice? I think that you're more likely to get a hodgepodge of conflicting advice and dysfunction from your, quote, team when you actually get an offer. And then once you're under contract, you're not done. Like, getting through inspections and stewarding the deal all the way to the closing table, you force these 2 people to work together that don't normally work together. And it just, so this is a tale from the trenches. Ask yourself, why would competitors who normally fight each other for listings and buyers, why would they suddenly start working together well as a team? And hint, they probably won't, right? And recently, there's actually been a new team formed in town, consisting of several high-end brokers that do a lot of volume, that have strong personalities and different ways of working together. And we've done many deals with each of them. And suddenly they're presenting themselves as a team, and it just made me laugh. I'm like, really? Hi, we're a team? Like, I don't know. Like, after fighting and working so hard to make our team work so smoothly together after many years, not just with Sophie, we've been together since 2013. So we have 13 years of working together. With Ian, he's been with the company, I think, about 10 years. I don't know what his anniversary is. I'll have to check that. We have many years of establishing trust. Yeah, we have many years of working together, establishing trust, committing to create value together, listening to feedback, adjusting our business practices, and trusting that we have our best interest in mind with working with each other. That's a real team. But these, like, made-up teams that are bouncing around Colorado make me laugh. I'm like, they're sort of like insulting to your intelligence if you know anything about team building, that these are not really teams.
This, for whatever reason, reminds me a lot of like a nature documentary. And it's like the polar bear, typically a solitary creature, is seen here teaming up to take down the food, you know? And it's like, you've got these agents, and they are typically, you know, solitary, solo agents. And seeing them team up is kind of like, what's going on? You bring up the reason, like, nature documentary would be like food scarcity. Is it listing scarcity?
Well, there's no listing scarcity at the high end.
No.
There is so much inventory that, and in fact, we had this great meeting last night with, I would call him an advisor, a past client, and now an advisor to the company. And he was sharing a family member's success, or a good friend's success. And one of the guiding principles of the company they work for is to not take clients that they're not convinced can be successful. And they need to, and they're actually really selective on who they take as clients. And I think I've been that way on the buy side for many years, but I've been more liberal on the sell side. And today, I think the answer, he's absolutely right. We need to be more selective on the listing side. And so therefore, somebody that came to us with an $8 million listing, a $10 million listing, we would need to be really careful devoting resources to Mission Impossible, particularly if they think the home has 2022 values when the market has clearly slid downward at the high end. And if they're not realistic about the value and they're not willing to do the work, and they're convinced that their home and their style and their taste is the best thing since sliced bread, when it isn't, when it doesn't meet the standard for today's high-end, ultra-luxury buyer, taking that client is a disservice to them, and it's a waste of time for us. And I think some people are so desperate for listings, they'll take it, thinking that, well, we'll just keep driving the price down until finally we find a buyer. But this could be a multi-year relationship if that's your strategy, is just throw a sign in the yard and just keep reducing the price till we've found the market.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And then, because I don't know if we intentionally wanted to revisit that Upland listing, but it relates almost perfectly to that former client that we talked to last night and kind of this conversation as a whole. So,
yeah. And I don't actually, so I'll also clarify one more thing. I don't actually know what happened with that Upland deal. And there's another property that I talk about in the Fresh Listings newsletter this week on Balsam Drive that smells just like the same story. People that acquired the property this time in 2021 and think that, and they relisted it a few years later without doing any work, looking for a lot more money, and it's and have been on the market for years. I talk about that property in detail, but I don't actually know the stories. I'm just reading the tea leaves, right? Like that's what looks like happened here, and ethically, I'm really glad we did not take the Upland listing. It was a $2.5 million deal that we walked from because we felt like the type of success would not have been ethical because it would be predicated on the ignorance of the buyer. And even though there's that saying, caveat emptor, there's an ethical obligation to be honest on critical components of value and treating people that way, it just feels wrong to take advantage of other people's ignorance.
Yeah. I say, like, this newsletter, reading the tea leaves, if that turns out to be incorrect, the point stands that it's an illustrative of that being a case, especially if you're looking in Fresh Listings and that newsletter. It's a great case study for being able to identify homes that may have potential development issues and seeing a listing sell and then be listed back with little to no changes a year later. Like, there's value even if you misread the tea leaves,
Well, it was marketed for its development potential. It was acquired by somebody who a year later put it back on market. And even though it may have been in the listing as in the 100-year flood, it probably was, it still may not have caught the attention of the buyer. And we don't know whether the buyer's agent at the time advised their client to the restrictions on the 100-year floodplain or not. I don't have the facts for that. But the fact it's back on market and no permit, well, I don't know if a permit was pulled, but it's back on market a year later, tells you something, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For sure. Where are we at on this?
We are now into, I think it's time to move on from Tales from the Trenches, and let's talk about market conditions.
Let's do it.
And your sound is suddenly louder and suddenly quieter.
It jumps around through our podcast recording software, but my levels on the recording are the same.
Okay, great. Yeah. All right, so we're going to talk about high-level market conditions from January 1st through March 15th, so almost the first quarter. And that's enough data to have a good sense of what's happening in the market. We're going to talk about Denver, and we're going to talk about Boulder, and we're only going to talk about single-family houses, not condos and townhomes. If you're shopping for a condo or townhome, or frankly, you're shopping for a house, you really need to look at a granular analysis right down to the street level to make intelligent, actionable decisions. But if you're an armchair watcher and want to know what's happening broadly in these markets, we'll tell you. And in Denver, there was a 12% reduction in closings year over year. So this year, 12% fewer single-family houses have sold from January 1st through March 15th than a year ago. That's a big number. That's a lot of listings that's a lot of sales volume reduction. And in Boulder, the reduction has been far less severe, only 4% less than last year. And I would say part of that is because Boulder is a safer market in general. Boulder tends to drop in value far less when there are downturns, and it tends to boom stronger when there are upturns. It's much more compact, it has a supply constraint, and it seems to have endless demand to live in this community, and that's demand that's probably going to increase due to its even higher profile visibility via Sundance. I mean, that is definitely going to increase visibility in this for property and the Boulder lifestyle, which is, it's a fantastic lifestyle if you can afford it. Okay, so that's the big picture ticket on market conditions for Boulder and Denver. If you want granular analysis, you want to know the value of your home, you want to strategize about how to maximize this market, pick up the phone and call me. You can get my contact information at houseeinstein.com. You're also welcome to call another agent on the team if you feel particular resonance with anybody else. We've got a fantastic team here and are happy to advise you. And now let's respond to our podcast listener who asked us to kind of look at the lower foothills and how those markets differ from each other. And so if you were to draw a shape, right, look at the west side of Boulder all the way from Left Hand Canyon, drag down, you could even arguably include Lyons, but drag down from Left Hand Canyon to the south all the way down to El Dorado Canyon, you're going to see these lower foothill properties that exist, that dot that mountain backdrop, most of which, if they're close to the city, are outside the blue line. And if they're outside the city, they're in Boulder, unincorporated Boulder County. And they trade radically different from each other. And I've been pondering this ever since buying my own mountain home. I live in 4 Mile Canyon. Why is my house worth so much more by literally a canyon I can see? I can see Sunshine Canyon properties from our house. And it would add probably 50 to 70% value for just being one canyon over. And having listed and sold homes up here, the other key distinction is the time it takes to get into town. And Sunshine and Pine Brook have direct access into the city of Boulder without being on a major artery like Boulder Canyon.
Yeah.
Or US 36 if you're coming down from Lazy Acres, you're gonna see a dramatic change in valuation. Some of it also applies to view corridors. Like if you have a really special perch and it shows you a gorgeous view of downtown Boulder and you can hop on your bike and be there in 10 minutes, that has a lot of impact to the valuation of the property. So if you are thinking about buying or selling, if you own a property in one of these foothill locations, you really need to evaluate within your canyon location, within your kind of footprint when you're looking at comps. And if you're buying, you need to understand how differently these can trade. Like some of it's very local factors, like Sugarloaf, for example, has a section of narrows that are extremely icy, extremely sketchy. I don't drive Sugarloaf every day, but the days I've driven it, when it's icy, it's far worse than 4 Mile Canyon, which also has a narrow corridor and some tight switchbacks. I think part of it is because the switchbacks are less steep. They're in a flatter section of the canyon, that it's far less scary, but steep and icy is like a lesson for sliding out, right? And of course, they're narrows that are in very shady spots. That's why they get icy. So understanding the drive the length of drive, the quality of drive, the winter access and maintenance has a huge impact. The view corridors, all of this plays into comps for selling or buying, and it would be very easy to be misled by an agent that doesn't care about you from a fiduciary perspective, that will say, oh my God, look at this amazing house on Sugarloaf, and here's a similar size house on Sunshine, ignoring the drive differences, ignoring the way these canyons trade from each other to push you to go ahead and buy this house, when you don't realize that it's an outlier in Sugarloaf, and it actually is at the very top end of the market. You're overpaying by a couple $100,000 because you're getting blown away by the views and not thinking about how different this canyon is. And within the canyons themselves, by the way, there are little nuanced areas, right? So up here on the other side of 4 Mile, there's a location called Mountain Meadows. Mountain Meadows is platted, which is a completely different animal than unplatted land. Mountain Meadows gets plowed. Mountain Meadows gets trash service. We don't get trash service.
Dang.
Right? So how does that impact your day-to-day life? And this is the job of your buyer's agent or your listing agent, to help you properly market the home with its true competitors. Or if you're thinking about writing an offer, isn't pushing you from knowing that scarcity affects your mindset, is talking to you from a rational perspective about how these near mountain communities are so different from each other that impact you day to day. And like lack of trash service. Let me tell you, not having trash service at the house has a lifestyle impact, because you are doing what? Hauling your own trash and recycling.
You become a bit more familiar with how much waste you produce, I'm sure. And
very much so.
I'm actually pretty green to, I guess, the residential geography of the foothills in Boulder. Increasingly so, unfortunately, but you see burn scars. And you'll see they look naked, right? Because they're just a home on a bare mountain. Is there a noticeable? It's almost a positive, right, to have a home that's just a speck on a mountain with no trees from a fire standpoint. But is there a value difference there too? Because I'm sure I personally want to be in the woods. Does that play a whole lot into it? Yeah.
Insurance doesn't seem to care if you're in a burn scar or not, but from a practical perspective, you would think a burn scar has less risk of another wildfire, although it still has risk, because you might have a bunch of snags or dead trees sitting around your property that could potentially accelerate a fire.
And embers and
embers, but you also have better views from a burn scar, so it absolutely has an impact. It needs to be evaluated on a qualitative basis. And a newer home also will have far less risk of burning, because the materials on the outside it's hardened. It's not impossible to burn it, but it's harder for a home that has hardy board siding, a metal roof, adequate wildfire mitigation around it. It's less likely to burn than something that was built in the 70s and is sitting in a narrow, tight canyon surrounded by growth of trees that haven't burned in 100 years, and it's thick, right? That, I would be far more nervous about that than a home that's sitting in a burn scar.
Or the textbook log cabin, right? That's literally just wood. Yeah.
Some of these houses, there's one up here that sold, and we looked at it a couple of times with buyers, and at the end of the day, we couldn't get past the 70s architecture. It was really diminished in terms of its design, because it doesn't have big open wide views. The windows are really narrow and small, and the ceilings are low, and it feels kind of it feels almost like a maze, right? It doesn't have a big open floor plan, and it's surrounded by older trees, and and looking at this thing, you're like, okay, this is so different than a home that was built 10 years ago with more storage, sprinkler systems. It just goes on and on. And so understanding that nuance is important too.
Yeah. I always, you'll see homes that are in fantastic locations, but the home itself almost looks like it came out of a developer's catalog, and it doesn't even have windows pointed at the view or anything even designed for the location it's in. Oh, that drives me up a wall sometimes, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about sales of the week.
We have 6 of them. I think I was with you, Oz, maybe when we picked 4, or when we hit 4 of them. Then we had to jump tasks, but I will have opinions. If you intro them, I will form an opinion.
Okay. Well, 2 of them are in a location that is either Paragon Estates or Spanish Hills. They're very similar to each other. And this is a little perch. It's a hill upslope on the east side of Boulder along South Boulder Road. So it's kind of sandwiched between US 36 and South Boulder Road, which is kind of a triangle shape, and it leads up to Davidson Mesa. And these houses that are in either Spanish Hills or Paragon Estates, some of them have mind-blowing view corridors, and some of them don't. Some of them burned completely in the Marshall Fire and have been replaced. And this is one of the most exceptional locations in Boulder because you get the views of the Flatirons and the city of Boulder. You're within a 10-minute drive of the city. It feels pastoral, and that little gently sloping upslope to Davidson Mesa creates all of these perches. So it's an exceptional location. Some of my favorite clients ever have acquired there. Your favorites too have acquired there and have built dream homes. I'll tell you their name later if you don't remember. We don't mention them on the pod, but
Nope.
For sure, we have some great clients in this location. And our first sale of the week is 1000 Spring Drive. And this property closed on March 18th for $5,125,000. It's a sizable house, over 5,000 square feet, but it's a 90s build and very much looks like a 90s build. It was originally listed at $6.2 million back in July. So they chased the market down, and they ended up over $1 million below where they started, $1,075,000 below they started at 6.2 when they finally found a buyer. And that's not atypical for this end of the market to have longer sale process times and have price adjustments. The market has certainly come down. But if you flip through the photos, you're going to see a home that has some nice updates from the 90s, but is still a 90s era house. No getting around it. And has some nice views. So you can see that through the windows. And this is one of the important things to consider. What is the value of that unimpeded view? And if there is some impediments, like landscaping down below from your neighbors, how much taller are they likely to grow? And many of them have fully grown, so you're probably looking at a mature view. I think it's a cool property. Took a while to move off the market, and sold for $5,125,000.
Yeah, very cool property. I think given its proximity to like Via Appia, you're probably living, call it, in Louisville a little bit more. But South Boulder to Boulder proper is pretty quick too. There's like a fume hood in the mudroom between the garage and the rest of the house. There's a picture of it. I wonder if the intention was there, but
yeah, me too. I saw that fume hood and I'm like, what could they be doing down there that would result in noxious fumes that requires its own hood?
Yeah.
And
I'm thinking like if you've got like a parts cleaner, but
I mean, it's got like, if you look at the curve, so this is, it's a tool room where you've got the rolling tool boxes, and then you've got the curve cut out from the workbench, and you've got all the power there. So it's, it just is described as a shop, but most shops don't have a fume hood. So I wonder what art or other work this person was working on. But judging by all of the beautiful woodwork throughout the house, it wouldn't surprise me if it's somebody that was into woodworking.
I think you've got a good point there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like yeah,
I mean, juicy house.
Great
but
location.
So here's the one to contrast it with in style, and that is 635 Paragon Drive. And 635 Paragon Drive was constructed in 2017, so much newer, and totally different style, right? It's a contemporary home, a much more modern home. It's described as exquisite luxury farmhouse. I don't know what makes this house a farmhouse. There's nothing farmhousey about this house in my mind, but okay. And the house is
on the exquisite part, yeah.
So what's interesting about this deal, and this is one of the take-homes, the first take-home, is that it was actually on the market last year, right? So it was listed from February through January, and then that listing expired. And during that time period, there was a refresh. At the very beginning or the middle of January, they refreshed it, and it's during that refresh that it sold. So even though the listing has some confusing information, like in the details it says days to offer 0, days to sale 0, that's because it had an overlapping expired listing, and the database is screwed up. So the real time on market began in February of last year, and it was on the market for probably over a year, right? We don't know the actual date it went under contract because it went from active to sold in the new listing period, which is, this is listing information incompetence. I'm not sure what else to tell you. Like, I'm tempted. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead while I'm talking about this. I'm going to notify the MLS that this data doesn't make any sense, right? But when you look at the timeline itself, you can see that it was on the market for over a year before it finally closed. And they originally listed it at 5, and they chased it down to 4.675, which is the supposed sale price without any disclosed concessions. And it looks like the listing agent had both sides of the deal, so it's unclear exactly how this whole deal played out. But for about 4.675, you get a very similar house with in terms of function and size, than 1000 Spring Drive, much newer, decades newer, and you're getting a 4-bedroom 6-bath versus a 5-bedroom 4-bath, which points to changing priorities. We don't need as many bedrooms these days. People are having smaller families, but we still want the bathrooms for entertaining purposes. So very similar in size. Switch around the bedroom and bath count. Nice 1.4 acre lot, which is significantly smaller than the 3+ acre lot for 1000 Spring Drive. Very different style, but still exceptional and very similar location for both of these houses.
Absolutely. Really a big fan of the landscaping on this one. It is, I can't imagine it's this much of a value difference, but it is right on Paragon Drive, whereas I think Spring was fairly removed from you went up kind of a private drive for a while. But then you're this far into the neighborhood. Well,
I mean,
you probably would see some.
You're going to get traffic between Wells Drive and Paragon Drive. I mean, these are good points for that could affect value. But the way the home is designed, if you notice, there's a lot of vegetative screening to protect the home from views on Paragon Drive. So you have to look at these things on a case-by-case basis. You might be better off from a lifestyle perspective with landscaping that screens you and a short driveway than a giant driveway and no landscaping, but you are now plowing a flag lot for 1000 Spring Drive, right? There's 2 houses.
Good point.
No, actually, is that a flag lot? No, it looks like you have your own private driveway, but that's still a really long driveway, right? So when it snows again, which it will, you're going to be dealing with that. And so I don't know. I have a plow truck, so I have no problem with a long driveway, but I can tell you not everyone has my enthusiasm for snow removal.
No. Oh, that's funny.
Okay.
Yeah,
so two houses that illustrate 2 very different houses, functionally the same, that illustrate the market and support the market for $4+ million houses in Paragon Estates or Spring or Spanish Hills, which people kind of conflate these two together. I'm not. They're different subdivisions, but they're basically the same spot.
Yeah. Where it comes from. It's
right.
off market now. I'll bring it up with you later, but I saw this with some of our clients. It's right next to that other Spring Drive home. Kind of an interesting property.
Are you messaging me something? Okay. All right.
No, another time later.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll talk about it another time. All right. Let's talk about 3875 Cloverleaf Drive. And this is a property that also had been on the market. So let's talk about listing history first. It was listed, no, it actually wasn't. So 2021 was the last time it had been on the market and had not sold, right? So it had been listed beginning in 2020, So May of 2020, they had it on the market for 3.8. It did not sell. They pulled it off at the end of March of 2021. And then 2 months later, on May 11th, 2021, they relisted it. And at 3.7, it did not go under contract. They cut the price to 3.575. We're still in 2021. It did not sell. But the agents involved and many others in the community, I remember seeing this house, had knowledge of it, right? Knew that it had not sold. And likely the seller was still willing to sell it, provided they could get the price they had in their head, the price they wanted. And that's pretty much what it looks like happened here. This property was not officially on the market, and it sold in one day, which basically is telling you that this was negotiated among agents who knew that the property was still available. And let's talk about the location. I really like this location. If you look, there's a little park that's called Melody Park off of 16th Street. Some people like to refer to this neighborhood as Melody. It doesn't really matter. Technically, it's Wilson Heights, but it's a great little spot. And it's north central Boulder on that upslope on the way towards, say, Lucky's. There's that hill that you climb up to get to Norwood. It's just below that peak. And so it has some really nice views. And it's a great home. Originally 60s era, but completely rebuilt. Obviously not a 60s house anymore. And just under 5,000 square feet, 5 bedrooms, 6 bath, 3-car garage. When you want those features, right, the 3-car garage and a larger bed and bath count, and you want view corridors, there's not a lot of houses on the market. So sometimes you have to look through expired and withdrawn inventory and think about, wait, hold on, this house hasn't sold. So that's the type of consultation that a really good agent can do for you. And it appears to be what happened here. We don't fully know the situation, but it was bought at 3.5, and it just closed on March 18th.
Yeah, it's nice. It looks like it was put on rent, put up for rent on Zillow in 2025. So wonder about that. But speaking of, I think the last podcast we talked about Sundance rentals. This one, I mean, it's got the eye-catchingness to it, and
all day long. This is a Sundance party house, if they want to do that, right? I mean, Sundance party house could also trash the heck out of the house, but because it has really nice entertaining spaces, because it has that picture perfect Flatiron view, it's really close to the city. It's a house that would probably rent for a lot of money during the Sundance Festival.
Mm-hmm. Love the wood tones in it. Photos look great.
Yeah. I love the deck that faces to the south. The wood tones are really pretty. Yeah. So one thing I want to mention, if you are looking at one of these houses that has a year of 1965 of original construction, but then you're looking at it and you're saying this is not a 1960s house, likely they retained the original foundation. And then they built an entirely new house on top of that. Sometimes that works out really well. Sometimes the original foundation may be under-engineered. And on something that's like on a steep hillside, I would want to look really careful for signs of movement, because the engineering from the 60s and 70s is radically inadequate compared to what engineering standards exist today for house foundations. And so this is something that you can usually tell with a close inspection. If there's significant signs of settling, look closer. And you may want to walk, because you could be buying a pretty big problem if there are signs of movement.
Yeah, that's good looking out, especially built on the original foundation. I wouldn't do that on my home.
What are you saying, Hamish?
Sketchy, You
have a sketchy foundation?
Just gonna leave it at that.
Okay, you don't want to build a house on a sketchy foundation?
The house is still standing.
Go wrong? Yeah. And that's said just like a listing agent. Hey, man, the house is 70 years old. It's still here. It'll probably be here in 70 years. Yeah, maybe.
Probably.
Okay. 2587 Ginny Way is our next sale of the week. And this particular property is interesting because we love Blue Heron Estates. We've got some great clients who live in the neighborhood. We've worked with an agent multiple times who sells a lot in Ginny Way and lives there. I don't know if he's on Ginny Way or Blue Heron Circle, but lives in the neighborhood. It's got a really nice country club feel with a community center and a pool. that's super popular in the summer. There's lots of families here, and the price points are actually quite reasonable compared to other options. And this one struck me because it was way, way less expensive than most that have sold in this neighborhood, and that's largely because it backs to 95th Street, which is a busy road. So if you're going to buy something like this, you're probably better off buying a little bit more inboard, but I mean, the price was right, and in this case, they had it listed at 1.1, and they sold it for 1.1, which I think was actually a really aggressive price, aggressively low.
Yeah.
And it still didn't sell right away. It listed in October, and it didn't go under contract till February, and it sold and closed on the 20th, which was just a few days ago. The house itself we could talk about, but really these are family-friendly, multi-bedroom, like plenty of bedrooms and baths for most families, reasonable square footage, 2-car attached garage. Like these are the basics that attract many buyers. I would say straight up the fairway there. Split layout is not great in terms of the bedroom layout. You've got 2 on the main, so it's a ranch with a basement, 2 on the main, 2 in the basement. That works for people with teenagers, but doesn't work for people with smaller kids. And overall, the interior was adequate. Like the finishes are fine. It doesn't blow you away until you look at what else you can buy for 1.1. And when you look at what else you could buy for 1.1 in Lafayette, you're going to realize that this is actually quite a deal. And most of the updates it needs are largely cosmetic, provided the one thing you can live with, and that is being up against 95th Street. And if you could afford to go to 1.3, 1.4, I would have been strongly encouraging you not to buy this house because of the long-term market impact of being up against a busy road. It just hurts you.
95th is busy too.
It just it just hurts you in the future when you go to sell it. I mean, it might also hurt you in terms of like air pollution, but I don't think it gets that much traffic, Hamish. It gets a bit. It's not like Foothills or US 36.
No, I thought it was the lower part of it. I was thinking Indian Peaks, but you're right. Once it's past Arapahoe, it gets a little bit less.
It's definitely lower. It's less traffic once you're past Arapahoe, once you're north of Arapahoe. So it's still a little busy. It's a yellow line street, which is my rule of thumb for hitting the pause button on the investment. If it's on a yellow line or it's within 3 houses of a yellow line street, you may want to rethink your investment thesis because some engineer decided it gets enough traffic for a yellow line. These days, they're removing lines to make traffic slow down, which is some sort of counter thinking, right? Like if you remove the line, traffic will be forced to go slower, and it's true.
It's working. There's another principle called like vertical friction or something, where if you place a lot of like vertical things next to the roadway, close to the boundary of the road, drivers psychologically like slow down. Can't remember the name or thing behind it, but some pretty interesting tactics now.
I mean, the Orwellian term for that is called traffic calming.
Yeah.
I mean, they thought about calling it
Orwellian.
Driver infuriating, but they decided to go with traffic calming, or driver anxiety inducing, and they decided traffic calming was a better way to handle the effect. Inducing.
Yeah, probably.
I mean, you feel it, right? Anytime you're in a narrow corridor,
you're like, oh shoot,
and there's 2 sets of there's cars parked on either side, and there's just enough room for 2 cars to go by. What happens? Both cars slow down because they're like, it's narrow. And sometimes one car will even pull into like a half parking space to get out of the way a little bit.
I'll do that for people.
When I'm driving my van, people always pull to the side. They're like, let the van go through.
Just don't trust other drivers, like,
True.
Yeah. But if you want that experience, check out Moorhead Drive in Boulder. They just did that, removed the lanes, and it's actually calmed it down a lot.
I think that was like a year or 2 ago, but for sure it's calmed it down.
Yeah.
All right, 527 West Ash Court in Louisville is our next sale of the week, and this particular one is fascinating because, well, I guess it isn't fascinating. It just backs up our experience for the last few months for homes that are anywhere from 800 to 1.1 in both Louisville and Boulder. And if the house is in good condition and it's in a great location and it's priced, in this case, a little aggressively at $950, it likely will attract multiple parties and be sold very quickly. And that's what happened here. It sold for $30,000 over list, and it was only available for a few days before it was locked up under contract. Agents that we've worked with many times as the primary listing agent. I think they have an assistant as the secondary. And that, I mean, this is straight up the fairway. Excellent house. with classic layout, 3 bedrooms on the upper, 1 on the lower level, and 1 in the basement. Tri-level design. And even though the kitchens and the baths are a little on the dated side, those things can be fixed. You're in a fantastic, great bones on a fantastic cul-de-sac location in what I think of as a super desirable part of Louisville. You are north of South Boulder Road, but you're still only a few minutes on a bike to get to downtown Louisville. You can cut through trails that lead you directly there, which many people don't realize, but the ways to get around Louisville are not limited to the way you would drive. If you're trying to get to downtown on a summer night, on the weekend for the street fair, or you are just going to a restaurant in downtown Louisville, there's so many ways to get there that don't involve driving on South Boulder Road, or riding on South Boulder Road, I should say. So anyway, really great tri-level house, 3,200 square feet, 5-bedroom, 3-bath, and closed for $30,000 over list. Looks like no additional disclosed concessions, was not a cash deal. And I still think they got a great house. Like, even though they paid $30,000 over list, this house looks very intelligently designed with easily updated finishes when your budget allows in the future, and works for a lot of families. So under $1 million, that's pretty phenomenal for Louisville.
Yeah, I quite like the layout of this house, and I mean, they've definitely added windows to it, and looks like a decent amount of work in the ownership of this house over the years. It comes from a place of care, from what I can see, not like rush flips or additions. They got cool little skylights at the top, and there's a little bit of solar there. It's cool.
When I was single, I had this rule of thumb for roommates, and my rule was that, and it carried forward to marriage too, but the general rule was I should never be embarrassed if somebody stops over and wants to hang out. Like, the house should look in good enough condition that I'm not like, oh my God, this is embarrassing. Because there's dirty dishes in the sink, or there's, dirty socks in the living room left out on the floor. Like the kind of roommate stuff that drives you crazy because you suddenly had somebody stop over like it's the 1980s and not text or call. They just rang the doorbell and there they are. Like, you should never be embarrassed. And I feel like when you buy a house, for a lot of people that reach a certain level of professional success, they also don't want to live in a house where if they had to invite their boss to dinner, they would be embarrassed by it, no matter how clean it is. And so that's like in my head, like a mental standard that most homes for people that are in their 30s, 40s, and up want to meet. They want to have a home that is not so decrepit that it's embarrassing. And there are quite a few homes in Boulder at the entry level that the owner doesn't really want to invite their boss to come see because it looks so janky and it's so worn out and obsolete and beat up. But it still might be a great investment, because you're buying an $800,000 lot with a $50,000 house on it. But that doesn't mean you want to invite your boss to come visit you at the $50,000 house, or a date. You want a home that feels like you've reached a certain level of professional success. And emotions and egos drive a lot about house sales, particularly at the high end. And we're going to come back to that with our $18 million Highland sale.
And before then, though, we have this $282,000 sale.
Yeah.
And this is 7933 Countryside Drive, apartment 123 in Niwot.
And the reason I have this on here is honestly because I think Countryside is underrated and is a great little investment location for people that want to get their foot in the door at a very reasonable price in Boulder, or want an investment property in Boulder. And it is really close to a shopping plaza in Niwot, great schools in Niwot. So this would rent very easily to young professional or family. This one has only 1 bedroom, 1 bath, and only 500 square feet, no garage. So limited in a lot of ways. But let's say you had grandchildren in the city of Boulder and you want a place to come crash, or you think that this would be a great little short or long-term rental. I think your investment thesis is going to do really well. Countryside has some downsides to it. I believe the ceiling is asbestos, the last time I did a deal in Countryside. But I would buy here as an investor myself. And so that's the reason I wanted to include it, is I think I pay attention when I see Countryside units sell. and the association fees are still reasonable at $350 a month. And if you're, there's a lot of use cases for these types of properties. There's also some that are really funky and weird, like including closets there's like access portals to the attic and no separation up there between your unit and the next unit. I've seen that in countryside where I'm like, hold on a second. You can access your neighbor's property through your attic.
Yeah.
That's a little problematic. We have to fix that. So that type of stuff is there. There's some funkiness to it. And the age, I would have thought asbestos was long gone, but I'm pretty sure asbestos is a thing based on memory. People remember memory is fallible. That's my recollection, is that these units had asbestos in their ceilings and their popcorn. But
fire hardening's in again,
Yeah, fire hardening is definitely in. But so cheap, right? I mean, 282, 283 is amazing for a lock and leave kind of place that it has walkability to retail, walkability to restaurants, coffee shops, a grocery store. Like you can basically go to work, come home, park your car, and go out for community experiences within a 3-minute walk from your front door, and that's so cool.
Yeah.
Like if my mother came to visit, right? Like a unit like this would work. It's all on the main.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's all ground level too, isn't it?
It's ground level, and then she could walk to a coffee shop or a restaurant or the grocery store and have a very basic functioning livable unit. And that's the selling point of countryside.
It's a really cool spot. It's got me, I'm like, oh, I could have done something like that, but I'm finding reasons why I didn't, and they still hold up, but it's damn compelling.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about shameless self-promotion. This is our segment where we shamelessly tell you about what one of our buyers or sellers and what they are either bringing to market or they're hunting. And in this case, we've got a new listing in North Louisville. The seller has been feverishly prepping it, doing a great job with quality workmanship to bring this property to market. And it will likely be, I don't know, we haven't set the price, but toward the lower end of Lewis's market. I would say aim for the $1 million mark and plus or minus
I think
100.
That's
probably about right. We haven't set the list price. It's probably closer to 1.1. But it's super desirable, and if you missed out on something else in Louisville and you really want an amazing house that is not a flip, but is family owned and lived in for many years, this is a great house, and you should reach out to us because I think it's going to go pretty quick, particularly because the seller has done the work and it's going to be professionally staged. Your amazing photography and videography, Hamish, is going to be the cherry on top. And the only thing we're really waiting for at this point is maybe another week or so for landscaping to green up a little bit, because it has like a secret garden
awesome.
on this cul-de-sac location with just amazing space, and also an interesting additional structure in the back for curiosity. So a lot going on with this one. I think it's going to be a fantastic sale and a great acquisition for a buyer who wants to live in Louisville in a good spot. Right next to a bike path too.
To me, this is like the one of the Louisville homes you see that is like the family Louisville home. It's like that family's going to be there for 10, 20 years easy, if not longer, and generations will pass. It's that type of house. Like it's large enough that it can support all that. It's great. Yeah. Yep.
And awesome. I'll also add that awesome sellers, ethical people with really high values of integrity and community. Like these are people that don't hide stuff. They care about doing things the right way, and that's what we're doing for this listing.
It's nice to see and be a part of.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's our Shameless. Stay tuned for that. And shall we move on?
Shall we talk about the news? Here we go with the news, and the first one is probably the most salacious, and that is the sale of 700 Highland Avenue in Boulder, which was so not on the market that it was whisper listing. These types of deals sometimes happen. They're extremely rare, and typically when you see a property like this sell, it's it might for a little while be on like a private network, but the so-called private network isn't really that private. All you need to do is download the app and you can see the listings. The MLS requirements for this property are that it be placed on the MLS, and interestingly, it has not been placed on the MLS. So it's not on iRes. I'm checking ReColorado right now to see if for some reason it's showing up there and not.
Sometimes they'll do that.
Well, it should port over.
Yeah.
Meaning that the data sharing agreements between the two MLSs should have it there. And so I think that the listing agent or the agents involved, as are often described, that for some reason they're violating MLS rules by not putting it on the MLS, but yet they leaked it to the news. Somebody leaked it to the news, because I got to tell you, the news is not scanning the tax records to see
who's selling, who's buying,
to see things are transferring. Like that. I mean, the news does report on high-end sales.
So this is 10,000 square feet.
Okay, hold on. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Yeah. It's super interesting. Right now, the record of sale, right, on the tax assessor's website says $500 and transferred over to the LLC. Not $18 million. So, all right, let's talk about the house itself, because we're sort of getting into the weeds with this. And the house itself is 700 Highland Ave. It's about 10,000 square feet, which it's a former church. And it was built in 1898, and it was completely redone. And you can see the old listing photos if you dig around online. You can see the listing photos from, I don't know, what year was that? 2015.
Like 2015.
So so not 10 years ago. You can see what it looked like. It may have been thoroughly updated since that time, but it sold for just under $5 million back then. Huge amount of space, really unique property, spectacular location, lots of selling points, including 6 bedrooms and 7 bathrooms. So who could possibly want that much square footage and need that many bedrooms and bathrooms other than a movie studio, right? That is looking to maximize a property right here in town that they will then use as part of their experience for Sundance. And I think that this is a seller that largely benefited from the Sundance phenomenon. Wow. And if you look at the old listing photos, you're going to see how the church was repurposed, the atrium of the church, the big open spaces, and the funkiness of it. Plus still have some cool views. Like, it is really a unique, one-of-a-kind property in the city. 18 million is kind of a mind-blowing number, if that's even accurate. And that's what's really confusing, is that it was not on the MLS, even though realtors are required to have it on the MLS. If you're licensed and you have access to the MLS, you are required to put your sales on the MLS. And when you go to county mapping for this and look at the tax assessor records, you're not even seeing the transfer.
You have to enter for comp purposes, right? On the MLS?
You're required to enter within 3 business days. Of course, the penalty is trivial, okay? It's like $50 or something. And so the tax assessor value was $9.4 million on the property. And the sales history still shows on various websites as the last sale price at $4.9 million in 2015. But we're going to assume that the reporting is accurate, that they actually maybe they contacted the tax assessor to get verification. So back in the day, I was actually at one point looking at just getting direct tax assessor data, and there's a fee for it. So maybe that's what BizWest and the Daily Camera are doing, is getting that data directly from the tax assessor and not through intermediaries. But long story short is it's reportedly has sold for $18 million. And I think it's a really good example of how our community is going to change as Sundance comes to town, because that's the one use case that I think can justify $18 million for this. Hold on, let me find I shared this with the team, but I've lost the, where was this? Marketing, there it goes. Okay. Nope, it's not that. Where was the link?
You're looking for the BizWest article?
Yeah, I'm looking for I already pasted it into the team. Yeah. Where'd it go?
Oh, we've been chatting on everything. There's trends and market conditions. Team. Yeah, you pasted it to trends and market conditions. That's it.
But I no longer see trends and market conditions in my list of. I see the private chat with you, and there it is right there. Okay, got it. Okay, here we go. So, sold for $17,996,000 according to Boulder County property records, and that must be direct link to them because that's not on any public-facing sites. I see the sellers are mentioned in this article. I don't think we need to mention who they are, other than one of them is the CTO for a tech company that deals with cybersecurity and was also a mentor at Techstars. So this is somebody who's in the tech community here in Boulder. And the name of the LLC appears to be one based in Delaware, but also not entirely clear. They happen to give Joel Ripmaster a little nudge for a quote, even though he wasn't involved in the sale. He was happy to provide a quote and saying, the ultra-high part of the market is very concerned with privacy. Yeah, no kidding.
Here we are reporting on it.
Right, here we are reporting on it, and here I am happy to be quoted on it. So, again, I think the only use case that makes any sense is it's a movie studio that acquired it, because nothing else. Otherwise, it's grossly overpaying for it, right? Like, this is something that makes no sense. $9 million is even at the top end of what I would think this property is worth, provided you remove the Sundance. Right? When there's a market of one, how many homes like this exist in Boulder? There's probably a handful, and this is one of them. And all of them through Sundance have seen their valuation explode because of their use case.
Right. I'm looking at this property tax. It's a cool $56,000 a year in property tax.
Well, so it's going to be a lot more sooner than that. Yeah. I mean, it's going to be a ton. So anyway, this is going to be the buzz of the luxury broker community, particularly because it was not even privately marketed. It was hidden from view, and it still hasn't been put on the MLS. So we don't even know which brokers are involved, and they may just have decided that they're not going to do it, and they're going to violate MLS rules, which I think it'll be curious to see how the MLS responds or doesn't respond, because they could censure the agents involved if they figure out who they are. They could remove their access and kick them out of the club. That's what they threatened me with for once upon a time in my newsletter talking about I had the newsletter public on the blog. It wasn't a newsletter. I was just writing about active listings all the time, and they threatened to remove my access to the MLS if I don't stop. So we'll see how that gets handled.
And Osmond's video on his visit by the Realtor Police will be in the link description below.
Yeah, when the Realtor Police come knocking, you pick up the phone because they control your access to the database. But look at this, the photos from 2005. I mean, really just sell it. Look at the the amazing patio space. Oh, I'm going to email it to them. I'll email them to you.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I'll send them to you.
I've been looking at the property details and trying to find something.
I didn't know that, Hamish. All right, we're going to send them to you right now in real time. So
Shall I put them in the...
I mean, it's a sold listing, so sure, why not? Put the link in the show notes. We'll link to the old listing from 2015, so you get a sense of what this property looked like 10 years ago. And likely, probably still very much looks like. It's possible they've done some updates, but certainly they haven't done 9 million of updates. So it'll be very, very interesting to see whose party is hosted at 700 Highland next February for the first Boulder Sundance.
Yeah.
I bet you money. I'll bet you $100 that there will be a party there.
Oh, Gatsby style.
Yeah. Really so you're not taking the other end of the bet. Okay, fine.
No, yeah. I'm in agreement, man.
Okay, all right. Anybody wants to take the other side of the bet, call me. All right.
We'll make it a poly market.
Yeah, we'll make it a little poly market bet. Let's talk about our next news item, and this one is much more somber. And that is, we've just hit our 5th anniversary of the King Soopers shooting, and 10 people in our community lost their lives in that horrific event. It absolutely impacted our community. and continues to do so today. And I think most people feel that justice has not been served, and there's also some uncomfortable secrecy around the shooter, their motives, the backstory. In some ways, that has been protected, and maybe there's reasons why. But it sucks for our community, and mass shooter events seem to have affected pretty much every community in the country, and this is the biggest one to impact Boulder. So it's a heavy topic, but I don't think we can let that anniversary pass without at least noting it.
Yeah. No, it's brutal seeing the photos, and they rebuilt that King Soopers. I think that was slated to happen before this, but it's, to me, I'm glad. I could see it just being a reminder every time, even just driving by there. You know,
it was hard to even walk in there after the shooting, after the remodel, and that's, I had met the police officer who lost his life, Talley, Eric Talley. I had met him before he passed, before he was in that event. The others I did not know personally, but even so, I just can't imagine like the heartache that the family experienced. And when these types of things happen, usually people move, right? It's just too much to drive past that shooting site every day. And if they happen to have lived in the neighborhood. And so, yeah, the community is still grieving. I don't think this is something you ever get over when it's that senseless and that violent.
Yeah.
It sucks. But I wanted to at least bring it out to our attention because it is something affecting our community this week and very much present to people throughout Boulder, but particularly in South Boulder.
Yeah.
Okay, our last news piece is talking about the fire season, and it is looking really scary because of how dry and hot it is already in Boulder. Today is March 26th. We've had weather in the 80s and 90s. The college kids are celebrating by being on the creek, and God bless them. I hope they're having a great time. They're in their bathing suits, and this is about 2 months earlier than normal for that. We don't have much of a snowpack. And so there's a lot of people concerned about wells running dry. There's very likely to be water restrictions placed throughout Boulder soon. I know Erie, I think, already has placed them. Mm-hmm. And everyone is praying for rain and snow. We're supposed to get a little bit, I think, this Friday. But for buyers and sellers that are in the market, this is, don't delay doing your fire mitigation. Sign up for the Watch Duty app. And also take into account the third level or tertiary concerns that you might have buying real estate in Boulder, particularly homes that are older and not fire hardened. It's not just mountain property that is subject to fire risk. The biggest losses of homes have happened in subdivisions in town. So this is very real. This is very scary. And if you're buying real estate, you really need to be cognizant of fire risk. In terms of, particularly if you're buying older homes that are not hardened.
Yeah. Thanks you mentioned the Watch Duty app. Like last week, I got a notification there was a fire, a mile from my house, and I've gotten 3 notifications similar to that. They've been put out very quickly, thankfully. But I'm in suburbia, y'all. Like if you look up Stanley Lake in Colorado, I'm right around there, and that's suburbia, so it's super alarming, and it's the worst notification. Well, not the worst, but it's a terrible notification to get, but it's a great resource. And Oz, you live in the mountains, so I think it's been more present to you, the risks and the dangers. I think you and Leah already have kind of like a go bag and plans for getting out of there if you need to, but that's something that I'm going to be seriously looking at coming up here. I did get a door-to-door salesman came through, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we're redoing exteriors." And I was like, "Well, do you do anything with hardy board?" Because no, we do something else. And then he recommends it, and it's not like a cement fiber board at all. It's still wood. And I'm like, dude, no. But yeah,
it's yeah. What I think about is like the psychological impact, right? Like if we currently don't have dogs, but if we did, they would be in the car with me anytime I'm doing showings when we're in high fire risk danger, right? Because even just the thought of our poor pets trapped at home in the middle of a fire is just heartbreaking. So that also applies to children. That applies to the loss of your possessions can be replaced. Like, it sucks to lose all your possessions. You can insure against loss to some extent, but you can't insure against loss of a family member. And that is something that is just tragic. So I think what you'll see if you move into the mountains is you'll end up joining social groups. And in these social groups online, Facebook and other places, you'll sense the anxiety that people have. Like, people will post at 2 a.m. Anybody else smelling smoke? Last night there was some loud explosions up in Mountain Meadows that likely were transformers that popped. And word on the street is that there was a cherry picker addressing the transformers. And today they were flying drones around the neighborhood. They were here on this side too, that are commercial drones, and likely looking for like damage on the power lines, I'm guessing. And that's, that creates a sense of unease for a lot of people. And I feel like my wife and I are comfortable with it, but it's not completely comfortable. Like, we could sleep at night. But when there have been nearby fires, we have not been able to sleep at night, and basically moved into our family's house in Denver for a week while the Cowwood fire was burning, because it was just so close, and the wind direction and the dryness freaked us out. And we're like, okay, we're going to go elsewhere. The most recent fire, the turkey fire, was even closer, like less than a mile away.
Yeah. And
could see it from my house with binoculars, ripping through the trees, but the wind was blowing the other way, and we had an option to get out in the opposite direction, so we felt reasonably comfortable with what was happening, and they got it under control so quickly. But man, that wind was driving it, and this is something that buyers need to understand throughout Colorado, not just in the mountains, and it's our new reality. There's no getting around it.
Yeah. It's just very scary stuff. You're right. That fire in Thornton, I talked about a couple podcasts ago. Chris, the owner of the property, said the same thing. He's like, all this stuff burned, but it is just a reminder that these are possessions, and the community and everybody's still around. So it is nice to be reassured of that. However, it is still so disruptive. And just I'm glad to hear about the drones checking the condition of power lines, and it seems like there's a lot more kind of proactive attitude towards wildfires, especially with how dry this winter has been. My grandparents have been living in Colorado, I think, their whole lives for the most part, and said they've never had a winter like this. And so, even they're pretty stubborn, but they're like, oh yeah, this could be a very rough summer. So final thing on my end is like, I've been I use NOAA's like forecast website, and forecast.weather.gov, and it's been generally pretty accurate, but I've been like false hoped so many times now. Like almost every week for the past month or so, it's had like snow or rain or something on there that just never happens. And actually, the likelihood of rain and snow for tonight is increasing, so that's really nice to see. But it's it's pretty rough, man.
The current forecast is rain likely, possibly mixed with snow before noon, then slight chance of rain. But the temperatures today is high of 80, and then it starts to drop. Friday is high of 50, and then Saturday we're back up to 80 again. So yeah, we are everyone is praying for rain and snow, whatever we can get to put moisture on the ground.
Yep. Carvouts.
All right, carve-outs, Hamish. I think you should lead. Since I've got one that's a little darker and maybe a little more somber. So why don't you tell us about positive pressure in a 70s home?
It's some positive news, right? So essentially, these newer homes, especially we were talking about like the Boulder revised energy code deal, has a lot to do with like net energy homes and energy efficiency, and part of that is kind of sealing the home's envelope to the point where it's very airtight to the outside. And homes to that degree of efficiency run into issues with like condensation and mold and air quality because it is so sealed. The indoor pollutants increase, and then you've got something like a mini split, which is local, so the air isn't getting circulated quite as much, and
or at
to
all.
mitigate that. Yeah, or at all. And so to mitigate that, people will use, they're called ERVs, energy recovery ventilation, or HRVs, heat recovery ventilation. To my understanding, ERVs temper humidity as well as temperature when they do an indoor-outdoor exchange, whereas an HRV just does temperature, like a little temperature transfer between venting air and taking air in. I ended up getting a HRV for my house to mitigate for radon, getting an air exchanger going from there. But this is a house built in 77, and so from my understanding too, part of the design in homes in 77 was like the siding and everything is kind of intended to breathe. But you get things like infiltration, and when it's colder or hotter outside or when the wind's blowing, it can be drafty and all sorts, and I like to call it like unpermitted or unsanctioned infiltration. So air is getting into the house through channels that I don't want it to. Whereas if I'm keeping the house at a positive pressure by using this HRV, air is coming through the house through the HRV, where it will get tempered a little bit in temperature, and then it's adding more air into the house than the house can vent, and so I'm keeping a pressure differential of about 2 to 3 pascals. So not a lot, but I picked up a manometer and checked all the windows and entry exits and everything, and 2 to 3 is about what I'm able to get. It's funny too, because there's probably a graph, right? Like I have a fan taking outside air and shoving it into the house. If I increase the size of that fan, you'd imagine that the pressure inside the house would increase. But because it's leaky, and then also because it's not been designed to be tight like a newer home, I've got like bathroom vents and stuff that are just open to the outside. So I can gain myself a little positive pressure differential, but I cannot go much further beyond that. It's been nice with this HRV, like it kicks on and I can smell the summer air. The thermostat that I've got has a little air quality sensor, and when it's running, the house is much better air quality than when it's not. And it is, it adds a little bit of a cooling load to the AC today, or a heating load, to the heater in the winter. But it's been handy, and just another fringe kind of benefit has been keeping a positive pressure makes it more difficult for the radon to seep into the house to begin with. So, I just redid the ducting for the HRV and kind of solidified things a bit more. I'm not using the HRV in the classical sense because this house is so leaky. I cannot have an exhaust from the HRV, so I've just got the exhaust looping within the house to temper the air that it's taking in. But it's essentially trying to inflate a leaky balloon, and it keeps the balloon inflated, but not so much that it's expanding.
So why is this your Carveout this week? Why are we talking about this?
Just did the HRV. So like a few things, like I more or less, like I'm surprised that I could even do it. Like I really expected this home to be so leaky that even chucking a fan into the house wouldn't make this much of a difference. I can't remember, it depends on the model of the HRV, but I think it's like 100 CFM. That means to anyone listening. And then if I had the exhaust fan going at the same speed, it would be 200 CFM, but that's like an exchange. So anyway, it's more, I'm just like, hey, I was able to achieve positive pressure in a 1970s home, which is kind of a nice thing from like, okay, I've got filtered and tempered air coming into the house. It's not drafty in the winter, and I'm able to kind of help temper the radon in the house with it too. So it's kind of a neat thing. I just really wasn't expecting it. I was like, I'll shoot for positive, but I'm not sure I'm going to get there. And we're there, and there's still things to seal up. So there's more work to be done. It's a brag. That's why.
Okay. All right. Very cool. It's just, You did this project a while ago, though, right? Like, I'm just curious, what bringing it up right now for you?
I found more leaks, the dryer being one of them. So I put a slightly sprung backflow valve on it. And then, so we'll see how that runs too. We'll see if I catch the house on fire. And then I redid the ducting for the HRV so it flows a little bit more efficiently, and it doesn't run into the main furnace system, so I don't have to have the furnace fan on all the time, which saves me a little bit of electricity. Yada yada. But yeah.
Okay.
And
cool.
Yeah.
All right. For my Carveout, I'm going to talk about something a little bit edgier and
Much
a little
more.
bit darker.
Yeah.
And it's still top of mind. Normally our Carveouts are very, I don't know, more playful, more kind of just life engaged, right? Like life positive. And this one is really important to talk about because of how it's affecting our communities. And it is very top of mind for me. And that is the rising suicide risk in certain demographics, particularly men in their 50s or older. And this past weekend, there were two individuals who, I don't know for a fact, but likely based on what's been shared, chose to end their own lives. And it's been an increasing trend in the communities I've been part of. And two in the same weekend hits really hard. And these are people I know from the cruiser bike community, people that have been part of our community for many years. And that's been my observation, that this is increasing. Like, this is not the first time, but there was a period in my high school days where there were a few people that passed away, that chose to take their own life. And then there was a long pause, and suddenly it seems like it's increasing. And I decided to go ahead and go down the rabbit hole to see, with AI, is this like an increasing risk for men in their 50s? And AI says, yeah, that roughly it's 3.5 to 4 times the rate of women, and account for about 79 to 80% of all suicide deaths, despite making up half the population. So, and so they're substantially higher the older you get, right? And 45 to 64 compared to people 26 to 29. I mean, it's just way higher rates is what AI is saying, and then it gets even higher for men that are 75 or older. So what I wanted to mention is that if you've lost somebody to suicide, or you are contemplating it yourself, you're not alone, and there are key factors to think about, including mental health, which can involve depression or substance use and undiagnosed conditions, but also major life transitions like career setbacks or financial stress, divorces and separations. Kids leaving the house can also be really depressive. And then, of course, physical health, right? And isolation socially can really impact people. And then, of course, access to firearms or other methods that could make it easier for men to commit suicide. So if you or someone you know is struggling, Colorado has resources, including dialing 988, which will put you in touch with a suicide and crisis lifeline that is available 24/7 and is 100% confidential. So I wanted to bring this up just because it's impacting so many people in my community right now and is clearly a rising trend. So please take care of each other and notice, particularly among men of a certain age, if they seem like they're getting disconnected, and especially if they're dealing with major career setbacks or financial stress or divorces and separations. It's really brutal emotionally, and it can result in people choosing to end their own lives. So I wanted to mention that resource. It's top of mind. It's a Carveout, and it's an unusual one for the House Einstein podcast to talk about it, but it is very present. So I wanted to mention it. And that is the end of House Einstein Podcast 112. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for choosing to invest your time with us today. We so deeply appreciate your feedback, whether it's delivered personally or via text or email or a response to something on social media. We take your feedback very seriously. We deeply appreciate your time that you spend with us, and we always learn so much from these podcasts, but we also hope to show you how we think about real estate and how we approach this profession. If you like our content, you can find more of it on social media, on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, X, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. And of course, I've mentioned this newsletter multiple times. You can sign up for it on the website. We'll also put a link in the show notes. You can sign up there. And the newsletter is the best way to find out how we're thinking about current market conditions and active listings. It's the only place we talk about active listings. And in this particular podcast, we're talking extensively about all that regulatory environment that I outlined for you in this podcast. Visit houseeinstein.com for more information. Thanks again for joining us. Hamish, last thought?
I don't have any thoughts on that. Yeah, I think thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.